So in this video, we're going to time travel back to 1985 when I took some lessons from Tony MacAlpine. This is around the time of Edge of Insanity. It was done, but not out yet. So I did get to hear the record before it came out and, basically watch him play along to some tracks and talk about them, explain kind of what he was thinking or what was going on at the time. So I think it's pretty interesting. I'll get into how it happened. I'll get into some of the stuff he talked about and showed me or focused on in the lessons. And if there's interest, I can also do another video where I actually get out the guitar and sort of show you stuff in more detail. There are some videos, or there is a video of Tony at GIT in 1985. And this is the exact Tony we're talking about, the same guy on the back of the Edge of Insanity record. He's playing a White Kramer Pacer through a PV Classic amp. And this is kind of prior to his career really launching. So I think it's fairly interesting, kind of get into it and we'll go. All right. All right. So Tony MacAlpine, 1985. Before we get into it, the usual like and subscribe stuff. I'm just sort of testing the waters with this stuff. So, if you're interested, I've been around a long, long time. I was a session guy for a while in New York, engineer, et cetera, et cetera. I played with Steve Morse, collaborated with him on one of my tunes that's on my channel. I've met Eddie Van Halen. I played basketball with Carlos Santana. He's not very good. Played at the record plant or recorded at the record plant, played Warped Tour, all this kind of stuff. So that stuff's interesting to you, hit subscribe and, I'll post more stuff like this. Every little bit helps as I try to get this going or see how much time I can put into it. All right, so Tony MacAlpine. Step one, how did this happen? I grew up in the same hometown, Springfield, Massachusetts. I did not have any clue who he was. I'd never heard of him. I was taking lessons from another guy named Rick at a place called Music World. Did that for quite a while. Rick was a good guy and a very good teacher. I learned a lot from Rick. Then around, I think, August 85, there was an article in Guitar Player magazine, or Tony was featured in the Spotlight column. And I noticed he was from my hometown, and I had no idea who he was. So I asked Rick, and Rick, my teacher, said, "Oh, that's the guy I take lessons from." So, of course, the bell went off in my head. I should probably go take some lessons from Tony and get it from the source. And that's no slight on Rick. Rick, was basically Tony Jr. So he had a lot of the Tony info and a lot of the technique. And by the way, if Rick should see this for some reason, leave a comment, because I don't remember Rick's last name, and he was a good guy. I haven't talked to him in 100 years, so that'd be cool to touch base with Rick. So what happened from there is I found out where Tony worked, and went over there to see if I could book a lesson. And the first thing that happens when I walk in the door is he's quite literally walking around with a wireless unit playing 1,000,000 miles an hour in the store. So that was my first introduction to Tony. There's practically nobody in there, but he's blaring guitar, walking around, ripping it, which was pretty cool, honestly. It's like, okay, well, now I get it, And this is obviously a little after Yngwie came out. So, I was familiar with that sort of playing, but it's different when someone's doing it, right in front of you. That'd be sort of like walking into a store and seeing Yngwie doing his thing, So that was cool. Then I booked some lessons with Tony, and that went on for, boy, I don't remember how many exact lessons I took. It was quite a few. At some point, I believe when his record came out, he just moved to California to kind of pursue the career, So it wasn't a super long time I took lessons from him, but it was a while. Next I'll get into some of the stuff he talked about and/or showed me. All right, so the actual lessons. A lot of theory. Obviously Tony's he went to conservatory. He's a real musician, right? So if you've ever heard Tony play piano, or actually check out the Rick Beato interview with Tony, you'll get the idea pretty quick. Tony can really play piano, very, very well trained, knows what he's talking about. Uh, and he was as a kid, he's no joke. I think he was kind of a prodigy kind of guy. Um, Absolutely knows what he's talking about. But there's a definite focus on technique and theory. Those are kind of paramount to him. And, I was a bit at odds with that because that's not really, back in the day, I enjoyed that stuff because it was popular at the time. But that was not my goal as a musician to be like a shredder guy, guitar guy, or any of that stuff. I did it back in the day and I can still kind of do it. It's fun, but it's not, to me, it's not really, I'm more of a composer and, melody guy, really. So, it's never been my focus, but it was really cool to see somebody do it up close. The first thing I can think of is the way he plays arpeggios, which, if you've seen him play, he does not play the typical sort of, leave your hand down by the bridge, Yngwie type arpeggios. Tony plays longer ones, 2-octave ones. He tends to incorporate his right hand. He picks over the fingerboard, which is really weird. So he'll sort of start over the fingerboard, add a couple notes with his right hand, and then come back down tapping. You can see him do it on the GIT video. If anybody's interested, I'll make a little video about exactly what he's doing. But it gives it a much smoother sound, which I think is really cool for arpeggios. I actually prefer the way Tony does it to the more staccato-y kind of Frank Gambale kind of sweep picking sound. It's maybe less aggressive, but it's far more flowing and sort of legato-y. So he's basically almost like tapping. It's almost like a giant tapped arpeggio, but it's not. He's picking them on the way up, adding a couple notes, and then tapping down, if that makes sense. You can see him do it again on the GIT video, but Tony's not one to over-explain anything. So I will say one of the tough things about the lessons was, he's so advanced. He would kind of show you something once or twice, and if you didn't get it, he would just kind of move on or say you should work on that. He wasn't really one to dig in and really hyper explain anything. And, I get that. It's tough for people at that level to slow it down and or really get into the nitty gritty or the details. So that was a little tough. I mean, he could be honestly a little bit intimidating. I mean, I was a teenager at the time and he was like 25 or something. He was cool about it, but you could tell he would get a little frustrated when you didn't get things. So there was maybe a little bit of pressure in the lessons too. But the first thing is the sweep arpeggios. You can watch him do it. Any video of Tony playing live, you're going to see him do it. And it's a unique way of playing arpeggios. I don't know that anybody else does it that way. And it's a different sound, which I think I prefer it, frankly, to the more staccato stuff. Yngwie's kind of his own thing, but it's like Tony's thing's a totally different way of approaching those. A lot of stuff about picking, which is kind of tougher to get into, really just not breaking the motion. He was very much a down, up guy. And he would do things in like little chunks, kind of like Paul Gilbert shows. You just take like a little 6-note set, little segment of like 6 notes and just basically hammer it into the ground until you can do it smooth at slow speeds and speed it up. That's kind of what he showed me. He was kind of big on the like 4-note per string exercises and stuff, which I never did because I'm not that guy. Again, I'm not a huge technique guy and I'm not a huge practicer. So I never really practiced that stuff, but he was showing me stuff like that, how to pick and how to not break the motion and that kind of stuff. I can get into more detail about that as well. A real helpful thing that he showed me besides like the modes and all that stuff is using your first finger to position shift. And I really agree with this one, and this was a great lesson from him, is do not think of the guitar as boxes, and definitely do not think of the guitar this way. The typical pentatonic scale people play that's up and down the box, basically. You want to be playing this way and all over the neck, and think of the neck as one big scale. That is probably the best piece of advice he or I or anybody could give anybody on the guitar. Do not get stuck in boxes. Do not play this way. You always want to be thinking this way. Tony's way of connecting scales was to use a lot of times his first finger. And this is something I could demo as well. He basically plays the first note with his first finger, slides it up to the next note, and then plays the rest of the scale, and so on. So what you end up with is a scale that rips entirely up the neck and entirely down the neck. And that can be any scale, but it's just a way from you to get from one pattern to the other without sort of breaking the motion per se. And he has a real unique way of doing that. You can kind of see it when he plays. Uh, he's either using his first finger or his pinky finger most times, and he's basically sliding up a fret, if that makes sense. So, like in A minor, it'd be A, B, C, D, E, and then repeat the process, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how he does that. And it's a great way to chain scales together and go up and down the neck. And you can also get crazy speed going that way. And you can see him sort of explain that on the GIT video, but again, he doesn't really get into much detail. One thing I did not like in the lessons is he was very big on making me learn other people's solos. And I've never been that guy. I don't like doing it. I'm too lazy to do it. And I was always interested in forming my own voice on the guitar. So learning other people's stuff was never high on my list. One time he was, I don't know if he would cop to that or not, he was super into Randy Rhoads at the time. He was playing a ton of Randy Rhoads, showing me Randy Rhoads, explaining it, wanting me to learn Randy Rhoads solos. So, he asked me to pick one and learn it. So I cheated and I picked Goodbye to Romance because it was written up in a guitar magazine at the time. So I could just learn the tab basically and not have to learn it by ear. So I kind of cheated there, and I apologize for that, Tony. But he was impressed I could learn it so well. But yeah, I learned it from a magazine. I remember that specifically because he was super impressed. I played it perfect, but yeah, I learned it from a magazine. Again, not a big fan of that stuff. I understand 100% why he would do that because, ear training is super important on guitar. But was not really my thing to spend hours learning people's solos off records. I just found it completely pointless and boring, frankly. But I get why he did it again. It's part of a lot of lessons is copying other people's stuff, but you really want to form your own identity, not just copy other people. Otherwise, I don't want to make this too long. Like I said, I can do another video and get into it more, but a lot of it, honestly, the biggest takeaway was when you see somebody who's that good close up like that, it really makes a difference in your playing. It's almost like proof of concept, when you see someone do it, it makes it easier, like you believe you can do it, or it makes it easier for you to do it. Like I think technically my playing jumped a huge level just by being around the guy. Because once you've seen that up close and it can be done, it's almost like, not that you can do it because he's a monster, right? But it just elevates your playing because it's almost like now it's possible. I never got crazy technical with the guitar stuff, but I knew enough to be dangerous, and I could whip out some crazy stuff when I felt like it or when I had to. I also really never played that kind of style of guitar as much. I was more of a straight up rock guy, so it didn't really call for, the crazy stuff. But it's really neat to see somebody that close up that can do that sort of stuff. It makes a big difference, honestly. And that's about all I can really think of, just as an overview of the lessons. Again, if anybody wants me to get into specifics, when I get time, I can try to throw together a video. Just leave us a comment or two. What else? Again, the other cool thing was the record was coming out. So I got to see him, he was proud of it. So he was showing me stuff from the record, and this is this song, this is that song. I specifically remember him playing along to it and sort of showing me, what he did or what he was thinking on some of the compositions. And that's a really good record. I think, Tony grew in leaps and bounds with Maximum Security. That is a great record. I think the music's way better. The sound's way better. But Edge of Insanity for a first effort, it's a classic, right? Of that genre. It's one of the classic cornerstones of that genre. So you can't knock it. The other thing I can think of with Edge of Insanity is that is the sound of a PV Classic amp. The pick sound is very percussive. I like the way Tony sounded, so I got a PV Classic myself, and the Edge of Insanity, if you're wondering what that sound is, that is a PV Classic amp with their term for distortion was saturation. That's PV Classic with saturation turned up, which gets a very percussive kind of pick sound. And Tony used those Dunlop picks, those heavy Tortex ones, because they were, I guess they don't bend and they don't break and they don't really wear down much. He was big on those. It's very distinct pick sound on that, especially on that first record. If you listen to it, you can really hear the pick attack. And that's a combination of the picks he used and a PV Classic amp, because they do make that sound, or they did make that sound. And those were great amps back in the day. Not the best clean sound, but a really cool kind of saturation or gain sound on those, if you can suss one out. They're probably around for next to nothing, and they were solid too. I used mine for years, and it took me forever to blow it up. So they were making quality product back then. That's really the gist of what I can think of off the top of my head. If anybody has questions, you can leave them in the comments. Like I said, if you want some examples, I'll whip out the guitar, maybe do some examples of stuff he showed me, and maybe a little more detail than he does. But you can look at the GIT video. He explains a lot of the same concepts. Is the same exact guy I would have known. Honestly, it probably happened right around the same time. I assume the GIT video is after he moved to California. So, you know, I took some lessons from him, and then when his career took off, he moved to California, and that was that. So yeah, leave a comment, subscribe if you want more guitar content. You know, my own music's on my channel. My tune with Steve Morse is on my channel, and some other stuff I just put out that's a little more compositional than crazy shreddy, but some of it's a little shreddy. So if you like that stuff, there's a bit in there. The record I just released is called Withdrawn from Consideration, and it's mostly instrumental, and it's stuff I've recorded even going back to cassette 4-track in the 90s. So it's new stuff, old stuff. A lot of it's pretty weird, but you know, so am I. So if you like that kind of stuff, maybe you'll like it. All right, take care.